Hi everyone, we are coming to you live from Purdue University with our Plant Science, the Green Machine Zip Trip. I'm Jessica, your Purdue Zip Trip guide. Now we have students all over the United States and even students from Kankaya, Turkey, watching this broadcast. And while we cannot see all of you out there, today's Zip Trip is interactive and you have a chance for your voice to be heard. Now, if you have a question for any of the scientists throughout today's program, you can email them to us through our Zip Trips website. Just go to your My Zip Trips page and scroll down to the section that says Submit your questions for scientists to answer. Just type in your question in the box and hit the green Ask button. It's that simple. And today we are also using a technology called Purdue Hot Seat to take student questions, and it is hot, let me tell you. So everyone say hello to our Hot Seat correspondent, Abby. Hi, Abby.
Hi, everyone. Hot Seat is a social media program that lets students use computers, cell phones, or other mobile devices to post questions and then vote on the ones they'd like to see asked on the show. We have 3 schools in the hot seat today. They're Decatur Central High School in Indianapolis, Indiana, Clay High School in South Bend, Indiana, and Pike High School in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can get started by going to topic number 1 to post and vote on your questions for the first scientist.
Well, thanks, Abby. We look forward to hearing from those schools throughout today's program. So this Zip Trip is all about plant science. Do you know how broad the subject of plant science is? Well, today we're going to find out. First, we are going to meet a scientist who is working on invasive species, or invaders, that can harm or even destroy native plants. Then we'll connect with a Purdue scientist to learn about cutting-edge technology that is being used to increase the amount of food that's being grown. Finally, we'll work with a Purdue plant scientist who is studying the carbon cycle of plants and how it may be affecting climate change. And we're going to run one of his experiments right here in the studio. So get ready to meet some scientists, have some fun, and learn something too. This Zip Trip is all about plant science, the Green Machine.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out.
This town is in danger.
It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it. How can it be stopped? Mob hysteria sweeps one city. Before long, the nation, and then the world could fall.
So today we're learning that plant science covers a wide array of subjects. Virtually every aspect of life on this planet relates to plants and plant science. And as we just saw, even plants have to worry about being invaded. One of the plant scientists working on invasive species here at Purdue is with us today, Mike Jenkins. Hi Mike, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Mike, I mentioned before the break that your research involves working on invasive species. That sounds pretty ominous. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, invasive species are species that are brought in by people from somewhere else, typically another continent, and they're brought into a new area. And when they come into that new area, they have the ability to expand, cause ecosystem damage, and crowd out native species.
Oh geez, so these invaders are actually caused by humans? Do they bring them in on purpose?
Oftentimes they are brought in on purpose. So sometimes species are brought in, a lot of times plants, where they're brought in for economic reasons, either for ornamentals or for agriculture. And they can also be brought in accidentally. They can come in with cargo, they can hide in the ballast of ships. And we also move species around accidentally as well. You've probably heard of invasive insects being moved around with firewood. But when you bring invasive species into the new range, they kind of leave behind all those enemies they had in their old range. So all the things that ate them, all their diseases are left behind. And when they come into a new area, that gives them the ability to grow and expand unchecked.
So invasive species basically don't have any natural predators, correct?
Correct.
So can you give us some examples of invasive species? Like, what would be an example of an invasive plant?
Well, a couple that I work with, one of is bush honeysuckle, and that's a plant that's native to East Asia. And in East Asia, it's just a scattered shrub living in the forest. When you bring it to North America, it forms these extremely dense layers that shade out everything underneath it in the forest. It also produces these red berries in large numbers, and birds and other animals will eat these berries, and then they'll spread the species to new forests that didn't previously have the invasive. Another one I work with is an example of an accidental introduction, and that's an insect called Hemlock woolly adelgid, and it's been killing insects, or it's been killing hemlock trees in the eastern forest, and I think we're probably going to talk more about that one later.
Interesting. Well, I've never thought about honeysuckle being an invasive species, but I have heard that some forests are being damaged. Are certain types of trees being damaged as well?
Yeah,
by
they are.
invasive species?
Yeah, they are. And one example, probably the first example, was American chestnut. So at the turn of the century, a blight disease was brought in from Asia, and in a matter of decades killed all the chestnut trees in the eastern forest. Prior to being lost, chestnut was one of the most common species in the eastern forest. In some parts of the forest, 1 in 4 trees would be a chestnut. So it was very important economically. People used it for lumber. The bark was used to stain leather. And there was actually an industry that grew up collecting and selling the nuts. So it's very important economically, so much so that Purdue University and other universities now are trying to take American chestnut, crossbreed it with resistant varieties of chestnut to try to make a blight-resistant American chestnut.
Interesting. So are there other consequences beyond just economic ones?
Yeah, some of the greatest consequences can be ecological. So if you look at forest tree species, they fill a very important role because they provide food and habitat for all the other species in a forest. And if you think about how forest tree species kind of fit together in a forest, you could think about the spokes on a wheel. So if you think about every tree species being a spoke on a wheel, as that wheel turns, if you lose a spoke, the wheel's still going to function. You can lose several spokes and the wheel will function, but if you lose enough spokes, that wheel's going to collapse. And that's the concern we have with our forests. As we lose more and more of these trees, we might see the system collapse. Now we'll still have a forest, but the forest is going to be very different. It's not going to provide the ecological services that we expect from our forests.
Wow, the consequences of invasive species are way more intense than we might have thought of. Now you said insects can be invasive species as well. As a plant scientist, why would you study insects?
Well, because insects tend to attack plants, and the invasive insects tend to attack native plants. And they return to the example of Hemlock woolly adelgid. That's a species that's been killing hemlock trees throughout the eastern forest, and the loss of hemlock has been compared and scaled to the loss of chestnut. So you go from having very green, healthy chestnut trees, you lose, or hemlock trees, you lose those trees, and you lose the food and habitat they provided. Hemlock is also very important because it is evergreen and it shades streams, and it buffers the temperature in streams year-round. And a lot of the trout and other species that live in streams are very sensitive to increases in temperature. So as you lose hemlock trees, you could also start to have effects upon aquatic systems as well.
Interesting. So are there any other factors that can cause or influence invasive species?
Yeah, humans are a huge factor. We bring them in, we move them around, and also some of our activities can really influence invasive species. And the return to Hemlock woolly adelgid is an example. There's some work that was done by a professor at Purdue University, Jeff Dukes, who I think we hear from later.
Yeah.
And his study looked at why hemlock doesn't spread further, or why Hemlock woolly adelgid doesn't spread further north. And what they found is it can't tolerate really cold winter temperatures. So it stays at a certain point. But as we see temperatures increase, we're likely to see less cold winters and allow Hemlock woolly adelgid to move further north and access trees that previously weren't available to it.
Very cool stuff. Now we will be hearing more about plant science and research, as well as how plants can be a factor in other areas like climate change later in our show. Remember, all of you watching, you can email questions to us throughout today's Zip Trip on our Zip Trip website. Just go to My Zip Trips page, type your question in the box, and hit the green Ask button. It's that simple. So, Mike, what can we do about invasive species? We've heard a couple of examples of how extremely harmful they seem to be. What can we do about it?
Well, once a genie's out of the bottle, it's really hard to put it back in. And with invasive species, once you have them, it's really, really hard to reverse the effects they have. So maybe we should have some of our students to look at some of the options we have for dealing with hemlock woolly adelgid.
Okay, so for all of our schools in the hot seat, go now to the survey tab in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and vote. We're interested in knowing what you think our best option is for dealing with invasive species. So Mike, what are our best options? Can you walk us through those options?
Yeah, our first option would be to learn the lessons of the past and not bring in future invaders.
Okay.
Our second option would be to refine the ways that we monitor moving materials around from one area to another so we don't spread invaders. With hemlock woolly adelgid, another option would be to regulate chemical treatments to fight the insects. And the last option is to introduce predator beetles from Asia and Pacific Northwest to eat the hemlock woolly adelgid.
Okay, so the cool thing about this show is it's all in real time. So Abby, what did the students in the hot seat think the answer was?
Hot seat users think the best option is to learn lessons for not bringing in future invasives.
Okay, can you shed some light on that, Mike?
I couldn't agree more. You know, some of the other options deal with what you do when you already have the invader here, but if we could actually be successful with the first option, we wouldn't have to worry about the later ones.
Got it. I don't think many of us ever thought about invasive species in these terms, so thanks for sharing your knowledge. But before you go, we've got additional questions for you, so let's check back in with Abby in the hot seat to see what questions have come in for you. Abby.
Hot seat users would like to know, what is the most dangerous invasive species?
That's a very difficult question to answer because invasive species have so many effects. There's invasive species that have huge economic effects, and there's ones that can actually have effects on human health. So, you know, it just depends on what you're looking at with regard to invasives. But the thing to realize is there's multiple species that can have multiple problematic effects.
Got it. And we just had an email question come in for you, Mike. This is from a student in Florida. How did you get interested in your line of work?
Oh, well, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time in the woods and a lot of time outside, and you know, it just kind of guided me into that kind of major in college and just kind of guided me into doing research. I always was very curious to know about and learn about all the plants and animals I saw outside.
Very cool stuff. And let's check back in with Abby in the hot seat. Abby.
The question of the moment is, why don't we use more pesticides on the bugs?
We do actually use a lot of pesticides on controlling invasive insects. The problem is that you have very wide areas where you have to use pesticides, and pesticides are a chemical, and there's certain restrictions and controls we have on their use, so you need to use them wisely. But they are certainly being applied to deal with invasive species.
Got it. And then we just had another email question come in for you. This is from a student in Illinois. Is there any chance of repopulating these tree species, the tree species that we're losing?
There is a chance, and I mentioned that with American chestnut, they've been trying to create a variety of American chestnut that's resistant to the blight. And that's experiments have been going on for a long time, and they're just starting to try to look at how we might return those to the forest and see how they might do now in the forest when they have to face the blight. So that is a pretty important goal of research.
This is so cool. Thanks for sharing all of your information with us today, and we'll see you at the end of the show for more questions.
Great, thank you.
We are sitting at the crossroads of change. Feeding the 9 billion people who will inhabit our Earth by 2050 will demand changes in the way we produce food. This change will require plants to be more resilient. This change will demand plants that use water and nutrients more efficiently. This change will mean plants will need to deliver even greater health and nutritional benefits. To meet this challenge, farmers will need ever-deepening insight into crop production to maximize the potential of every inch of their fields. Imagine every plant specifically tailored for your farm. Imagine having the knowledge to manage nutrients and water in ways never before thought possible. Imagine hitting yields we thought were unattainable. And now imagine making this a reality.
Okay, so here's the problem. The United Nations estimates that the world's population is going to increase to over 9 billion people by the year 2050. That means approximately 50 countries are projected to double in size. double. Experts say we're headed towards a crisis in providing affordable, nutritious food for this many people. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the unique methods scientists are using to find an answer to this potential crisis. And joining us live is engineer Melba Crawford. She's a professor in both civil engineering and also electrical and computer engineering, as well as a faculty member working in agronomy at Purdue University. Hello, Melba. Say hello to everyone.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everyone.
Hi there. Well, Melba, you've got quite the interesting background. It's a cool combination of disciplines.
That's right. This is really a hard problem, and it requires input from a lot of experts with very different backgrounds. So engineers in general will advance technology, and in the particular case of what we're doing here, civil engineers provide input on precise positioning, electrical engineers work on sensors and big data analytics, and of course agronomy is all about plants and soil science.
So it sounds like you've got it all. You're kind of a one-stop shop for knowledge in this field.
Well, I work with a lot of good people in these areas.
Good teams are important. And Melba, speaking of your background, you're in your background behind you looks pretty cool. Can you tell us about where you are?
Yes, so I'm about 5 miles west of Purdue University here in the Indiana Soybean and Corn Innovation Center, where we are actually doing work in plant phenotyping, and you can see some of the cool tools we're using.
Okay, you said plant phenotyping. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, so plant phenotypes in general are characteristics, and let's think of it in terms of plants here, that you can measure. So for plants, it might be plant height, it might be leaf area, leaf angle, or some chemical kind of response. Now, just like people, plants have a genome, and scientists can actually sequence that genome, but they don't know which genes are actually going to be related to plant characteristics. So we have to grow plants in order to actually match the genes with the outcoming, the resulting phenotypes. And this has been done historically, actually in greenhouses, where people grew plants in pots and then, took all kinds of measurements. But the problem is that a greenhouse, A, you can't grow that many plants, but B, it's not the same as being outside. So what we're doing here is we're growing hundreds of thousands of plants in the field and trying to emulate the real environment.
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense. So real-world measurements give us more of an accurate idea of what a plant is really like.
That's exactly right. Now, there's a problem with this, though, when we are out in the field. So I said we had hundreds of thousands of plants. And so let's say you're getting ready to make a measurement. And so this is a surveyor's rod. So this would be one kind of measurement. And so each of these is going to have to be done by a person. So you need a team of people. And that's going to be really difficult because you need a lot of people. So we're looking at other kinds of technologies right now for doing this kind of thing and acquiring all kinds of measurements.
Got it. That sounds like it would be challenging. So how do you do these real-world measurements? What kinds of tools or platforms are you using over there in the phenotyping center at Purdue?
Well, look behind me. So what we have here is UAVs. You see some small ones here. You see some larger ones, some copters, even bigger ones. You see fixed-wing aircraft here and over here. Some, again, are small, and some are quite large, like this one down here that looks like a freight truck.
And Melba, you said UAVs. What does that stand for?
Unmanned aerial vehicles. And it's the same, essentially, as what people call UAS, which is an unmanned aerial system.
Got it. Well, I can see how being up in the sky would help to get an advantage when looking down on the fields. I've seen satellites take photographs from space, and I'm wondering, do you ever use satellites or manned aircraft for your research?
Yes, we do. Satellites actually provide some kinds of information. Now, given the altitude that they fly, the information is not going to be at the same spatial resolution or give you the same spatial detail that you would have at lower altitudes. And the other problem with satellites is that they're in fixed orbits. And so when they come over, it may be cloudy or raining, so you might not get the data that day. Manned aircraft are another option, but not everybody has access to a manned aircraft, and that can be expensive. So with sensors getting smaller and being able to be flown on UAVs, then we have new technology that we can use that's really pretty exciting.
That is exciting. And we know that these drones or UAVs have cameras on them. Are they just simply really good digital cameras, or is there some sort of other technology that's involved in that?
So what we have is, yes, RGB digital cameras, and what you see in front of you are on the right is a digital camera. Back here, I'm going to show you on the UAV a digital camera, but behind it is this soup can looking object, which is actually a LiDAR. So in addition to the RGB, which sees the wavelengths of light that our eye see, we have cameras that actually acquire data in other parts of the spectrum and get other kinds of information. And we chop that up, if you want to think of it that way, that spectrum, into hundreds of little intervals, and we have what we call hyperspectral cameras that can actually get a lot of detail on plant chemistry. The other kind of fun technology is a LiDAR system. They're lasers. Using a LiDAR and knowing where you are and sending out a pulse, then knowing how long it flies, the pulse travels the speed of light. So knowing where you are and knowing how long it took from the time you released the pulse to it came back, it was reflected from something, you can tell where that object is. And we can use hundreds of thousands of pulses to build up what the structure of the plant is. So we fly LiDAR units on our UAVs as well.
Got it. So all of the measurements and sensors you're using on aircraft aren't necessarily the only platforms that you're using. I hear you've got a really, really cool thing to show us today.
Yes, so I'm going to show you the monster that we have here. This is our Phena rover.
Phena
we
rover?
sometimes call it a Phena rover.
Awesome.
So it's a high clearance tractor.
Wow.
We sometimes call it our Phenosaurus. And it has on it a big boom. And on this boom, we have mounted all these kinds of sensors. So you have cameras, you have LiDAR, you can put all kinds of, and this thing actually goes up. So during the growing season, when we start out, we can get really detailed information on the plants. And then as the plants grow, then we end up, raising the boom. But there's a time when you can't actually get through the field. Now, during this time, we always fly our UAVs, but we continue flying them until the end of the season when the Phena rover actually can't even get through the field.
Wow, that thing looks huge. So cameras, lasers, drones, Phena rover. With all of this technology, you must be gathering a huge amount of data.
That's absolutely right. So on the Phena rover with our hyperspectral camera, in 20 minutes, we will get 450 gigabytes of data. So you can imagine in a day when we actually travel, work about 5 hours in the field, how much data we would get. Over the summer, we get petabytes of data.
My goodness.
Actually, to get it back to the university, we download it here at the Phenomics Center, and it goes on a high-speed line to the university where it's actually processed and analyzed.
That is so cool. So with all of this new technology that's super advanced, what are we trying to do here? How will this help us to answer the question of how will we feed 9 billion people in the year 2050?
So Jessica, all of this is about supporting the plant breeders.
Okay.
Because the plant breeders need to identify the varieties that are going to be the most disease resistant, have the best yield, whatever their particular goal is with soybean, corn, sorghum, whatever the crop might be. And so this is the goal of our project, to connect the phenotype to the genotypes they already know and then advance plant breeding.
Well, I can see how that would help to get more food to more people. What are the applications for what we're learning? Any other applications?
Oh, well, in terms of the fundamentals of the technology, absolutely. So when we recruited people to work on this project, many of them were already working in the fundamentals of image processing, data analytics, positioning for other kinds of problems. So you could think of actually the biomedical applications, where if you think of the brain initiatives, then a lot of the image processing, signal processing, a lot of the sensing is the same. And so we can build on a lot that has already been done in other fields and is continuing to be done. And this will help us advance the science much more quickly.
Well, I think we've gotten a much better understanding of all of this exciting technology. How widespread are centers like the Purdue Phenotyping Center?
Well, actually, this is a pretty unique place, and there are really not very many at all in the world.
Well, you should consider yourself pretty special, huh?
I consider us to be very lucky.
And remember, for all of you watching out there, you can email questions to us through our Zip Trips website. Just go to My Zip Trips page, type your question in the box, and hit the green Ask button. Now let's go ahead and check in with Abby in the hot seat to see what the hot question of the moment is for you. Abby.
Hot seat user Kyle wants to know, do the UAV operate on electricity or gasoline? And users, don't forget to move on to topic 3 for the next scientist.
That's a great question. So actually, some of our planes have gas engines, and some of them are battery powered. And so there's a difference, just like there's a difference in the platforms. So the platforms that you saw, the copters, actually fly lower and slower, and they're good for some applications, but the fixed wings can actually fly longer, and that's good for other applications. And similarly, if you need to fly longer, then a gas-powered engine is going to be better, but it also has more vibration, and it has to fly faster in general relative to the particular platform that we might have. So we use a mix, and we use them when they're for the best application.
Got it. And we just had an email question come in for you. This is from the Area Career Center University. How much does the Pheno rover cost to build to conduct this study?
So the Pheno rover is actually a high clearance tractor that you might have seen if you live in the farming country, that's associated with spraying. So many of them go down the road, and they'll have these big booms out to the side that have sprayer nozzles on them. They cost about $100,000.
Wow.
And then the sensors are in addition, and sensors can be anything from a camera that might be $400 or $500 to a hyperspectral sensor that might be $120,000. So it's quite a variety. But the great news is that things are becoming much smaller and less expensive.
Right.
Even nanotechnology is doing research in this area of sensing. So exciting things on the future.
Exciting indeed. And let's check back in with Abby in the hot seat. Abby.
The hot seat users would like to know, is there a lot of maintenance that goes into the drones?
Just like everything else, your car needs maintenance. And so every time we bring the planes back, and actually they're flown by students here at the university who are mostly in aviation technology, and many of them have been flying since they were quite young. And so just like any other instrument, when they come back, they go over it, make sure everything's in working order. If we need to do any kind of replacement of parts, then they do that. But the plane behind me that's over on this side that you saw, we flew last year. And the plane itself had very little maintenance, just, routine kind of stuff. And it's still ready to fly this upcoming year.
Very good. And we just had another email question come in for you. Is using drones a relatively new technology in plant science, and what might be coming down the line next? What's on the forefront?
Okay. So I think drones in general are a topic of a lot of discussion. They're used for a wide range of applications, monitoring civil engineering infrastructure to, recreation to military applications. So in the plant science arena, as I indicated in the early part of our discussion here, then the thing that they provide is a capability to kind of do it on the fly, if you will, as that's kind of a funny way of saying it. But when you need to get into the field, when the plants are at a stage when you need to acquire data, when the sun is out, when the wind is not too high, then you actually have some control. Now, farmers are also getting into this game, and usually and like everyone else, when you start, you don't buy, an expensive vehicle. You start with something that you can learn with, and so there's some fundamental work being done in basic mapping, and there are companies that are trying to get into this game as well. The kind of work that we do here and other universities do is with advanced technologies, and so as we learn more, then that technology often is commercialized, and then it's moved into to more applications. So I would say relative to the future, you could think in terms of swarms of UAVs. So you want to acquire the data as over a large area, in our case, multiple fields perhaps, as simultaneously as possible, because you want to have the same response, the response at a given environmental time, relative to the environment at the same time.
Right.
And so swarms of UAVs with these sensors on them. Now, of course, the sensors are going to have to be cheaper, and in order to have a lot of them, so people are going to have to move forward in that technology as well.
Very good. Eye-opening stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all of this today. And we'll see you in just a bit for the end of our show with more questions.
Sounds great.
Climate is a great invisible regulator in our lives. Every man reacts to it with his own built-in thermostat. Climate governs the way he feels, whether he is lackadaisical or full of energy. The extremes of climate can disturb his well-being, slow down his work with the fatigue caused by heat waves. Climate can even hurt his pocketbook as industries become weather-bound, causing interruptions to payrolls and profits. When there is an evenness of favorable climate, the human body can make the most of life, with many other practical benefits for home and industry.
Well, we definitely think completely different about climate today. Now, with us is Purdue plant scientist Jeff Dukes. Jeff is an ecologist in the departments of forestry and natural resources and that's a mouthful, and biological sciences. Hi, Jeff. Welcome back.
Good to see you. Thank you.
So, Jeff, you're here today to talk about a very interesting topic. What's that?
Well, I think it's interesting. It's climate change and how plants and ecosystems respond and how the carbon cycle links all that together.
Very cool. Now, the issue of climate change is a serious one, so perhaps it would be a good idea to actually define what climate change is.
Sure, absolutely. So climate change is really just the changes in temperature and precipitation that we've been seeing. Like the last 3 years in a row, we've set new global records for warmth. It's the warmest climate on record. That we know that is happening in large part because of the increases in greenhouse gas concentrations, the concentrations of heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide. And carbon dioxide in particular is released when we burn fossil fuels and when we cut down forests. We typically cut down forests to convert that to agricultural areas. So there is this link right there between climate change and plants.
Got it. Well, we heard earlier how climate change was having implications in things like invasive species, as well as being able to produce enough food to feed people. So let's see, climate change really has a variety of impacts, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, climate change kind of impacts everything. If you think about it, we build our society to be we build the right infrastructure for the climate that we build it in. We have certain tolerances for when it's cold outside or warm outside, right? We have certain structures we put in place. And in the same way, species adapt to live in certain areas based on the climate that's there. And so when the climate changes, it scrambles the conditions that everything is sort of built for at this point. The species are adapted to the conditions they live in. Our infrastructure is built to deal with the conditions that we expect there to be in a given location. So when the climate changes, it just scrambles up everything and makes the species and our infrastructure sort of inadequate for the new climate.
I've heard of the term carbon cycle. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the carbon cycle is linked into climate change through the gas carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere pretty strongly regulates our overall climate in the planet. So the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to determine how much heat gets contained around the planet. Carbon dioxide is sort of like a blanket around the planet. And as you put more and more in the atmosphere, it's like adding more and more blankets to the planet. And as just as blankets keep you warm when you're in bed at night, you know, the radiation from your body heats up the blankets, and those blankets warm up, and then they feel warm and keep you warm. It's helping the planet stay warm.
And you've got a bathtub analogy?
I do, exactly. So if you think of the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as being sort of like the level of water in a bathtub, and the more water you have or the more carbon dioxide you have in the atmosphere, the higher that bathtub level is and the warmer the planet gets. Well, plants suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere when they grow. They use carbon dioxide as a substrate to build sugars and to build their structures. Plants are about half carbon dioxide. And so then when they die and decompose, that releases the carbon back to the atmosphere through the action of microbes and animals that basically eat that plant material or the dead plant material. And so when they respire, just like when we exhale, that carbon dioxide goes back in the atmosphere. And so that's basically a big cycle from the atmosphere into plants and back to the atmosphere. There are other aspects of this cycle too, but historically that has been basically a balanced cycle, with plants taking out a certain amount and the microbes releasing it back to the atmosphere, and so the atmospheric concentration was about the same. Well, now we're burning fossil fuels. We're taking these geologic formations of fossil fuels, basically dead plants from millions and millions of years ago, now coal, oil, and natural gas. And we're tapping into these, we're burning them. That puts more water in the bathtub or more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That affects the way that plants grow. So you might actually have more photosynthesis and a bit more plant growth in a warmer environment with more of this substrate, carbon dioxide, available for the plants. But at the same time, that's going to change the way the microbes respire and the rate at which the plants decompose, and all that material that's been captured by the plants is then going to get respired back to the atmosphere during the process of decomposition. And so it's important, if we want to understand what the future climate might be, you know, if we want to know what the level of water in the bathtub is here in this analogy, it's important to then understand what the responses of photosynthesis and decomposition to these changes in climate will be, because they're just so important in regulating climate overall.
Got it. And to help understand this, I hear you're a part of a really cool project. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. So I run this experiment in the Boston area in a town called Waltham near Boston. It's called the Boston Area Climate Experiment. And so I work on this with lots of different collaborators. It's not just me, but we're basically trying to understand how changes in climate that we're causing through human activities are leading to changes in the functioning of an old field ecosystem. And you can see that ecosystem in the plots in the experiment shown right here. Lots of different grasses and wildflower species here. What we're doing is we're heating them up using infrared heaters that you can see on the screen, and we have roofs that take away some of the precipitation, so we have drier areas and wetter areas and areas that are warmed by different amounts. You can see in the winter it melts out the snow. And we're studying how the different plants that are growing in these plots respond to these different environmental changes, so that we can use those measurements to improve models that predict what the future climate might look like. We're not the only ones in the world doing experiments like this, but there are lots of us out there. We're trying to look at the ecosystem and see what species might be winners and losers, and you know, basically what the future might look like in terms of the climate and what species end up coming out on top.
That's all fascinating work. And I hear you, I see that you brought an experiment for us to try in the studio. So walk us through this.
Yeah, so this is like a miniature version of the experiment you just saw on the screen. It's much cheaper though, and it doesn't have living plants in it because, well, it's winter and this is a much easier way to do this. But it has plant material in here. So these are 4 different buckets that have soil in them. They've all got the same amount of soil, and that soil has dead plant material in it. You can actually see little wood chips in some of these. And lots of microbes, bacteria, and fungi that are in there that are in any soil that you would find.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is figure out what conditions would make the microbes respire the fastest. So under what conditions would they grow the fastest and basically take that dead plant carbon, chew it up, and turn it into carbon dioxide.
Okay.
So we have two different sensors in each of these buckets. One will sense carbon dioxide concentration inside the bucket. The other is looking at the temperature inside the bucket.
Okay.
Okay, and so we're trying to understand then how fast is the carbon dioxide concentration in each of these buckets changing as the microbes respire. If they're respiring faster, the CO2 concentration will go up faster.
Okay.
And that's going to tell us where the microbes happiest, basically. Where are they going to be converting that solid carbon into gaseous carbon in the atmosphere, atmospheric carbon dioxide.
Okay. So what are the different conditions that you've created here?
So we've got 4 different conditions. We have two buckets here that I've added water to, so the soils are wet in these, and 2 that are drier. And then these 2 are basically just at room temperature. They're relatively cool. And these 2 are on this pad here. You can see what this is. This is a heating pad, just like the kind you might use to heat up your back or something if you threw it out. And so then all these sensors go to these 4 little computers here that basically show how fast the carbon dioxide concentration is increasing over time. So these computers have these readouts that show time on the y-axis or on the x-axis and CO2 concentration on the y-axis. And what I've done is I've plotted a slope for each of them that just shows how fast the CO2 concentration is rising over time using this equation y equals mx plus b here. And we can look at the m term there. That is the actual slope itself. And we can basically say, well, which of the m terms in these equations are the greatest? And that shows us which bucket has the happiest microbes.
Okay, so for our hot seat users, what do you guys think? Go to our poll right now and vote. So Jeff, what is the question that they're voting on?
The question is basically where are the microbes happiest, right? So where are they going to be respiring fastest and which of these conditions? Is it going to be warm, dry, cool, wet, cool, dry, or warm and wet conditions?
Okay. I'm gonna choose an answer in my head too.
All right.
Let's check back in with Abby since this is real time. What did our hot seat users think the result would be?
The hot seat users think the best option is warm, wet conditions.
Okay, let's check it out. Warm, wet. Are they correct?
They're right. Yeah, absolutely. The hot seat users are smart. So yeah, that's the set of conditions that is going to have the fastest respiration. And if you think about it, it makes sense. So we put our food, for instance, in refrigerators, right? We do that to keep our food cold and dry.
Right.
And because we don't want microbes eating all our food before we get to it. We don't want our food to get spoiled. And so, yeah, it's the same thing here. In our experiments in ecosystems, it's a little more complicated because we know the microbes are experiencing those conditions over a long period of time, and they may actually adjust to them. So that's one of the questions we're interested in studying over time out in the real world. But for this is just a nice sort of demonstration of how much happier microbes can be in one set of conditions than another.
So that would make sense why some people choose to put their loaves of bread in the refrigerator so they don't mold as quickly.
Yeah,
right? If
yeah,
they live
absolutely.
in, like,
or keep them
Florida
dry
or
or something like. Oh yeah. Keeping them dry might be really critical there. Yeah.
Well, that was a cool experiment, Jeff. Let's go ahead and take some questions. Let's check back in with Abby in the hot seat to see what hot question she has for you, Jeff. Abby.
The hot question of the moment is, why aren't your plots in Indiana near Purdue?
That's a reasonable question. So I started out working at another university in the Boston area, and I was there at the time when I started the experiment. And right after I started the experiment, I moved here to Indiana, and so now I make a lot of trips back to Boston.
Very cool. Okay.
It's hard to move something like that once you get it going.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty big project to move.
Yeah.
And we just had an email question come in for you, Jeff. Is there a difference between global warming and climate change?
Oh, they're just different terms. They're basically exactly the same thing. So global warming is what basically most of the scientific community called it initially because we were focusing on the temperature, but then we have to realize that there are lots of other changes that come along with that. And so it's not just the warming that's happening, but also precipitation patterns are changing. And the frequency with which we get extreme high temperatures is changing. And so global warming just sounds a little too simple. It's actually a more complicated phenomenon. And so that's the reason that the scientific community really moved away from global warming and is talking now more about climate change.
Got it. Well, that was very interesting stuff, Jeff. We're going to see you in just a little bit for more questions that haven't been answered yet.
Great.
Thanks so much. That was pretty cool stuff. I like the idea of feeding the world. So we hope that you've had a great time meeting some real-life plant scientists here at Purdue University and have learned some things too. We do have time for more of your questions for all of the scientists in today's show. So first, let's go to the hot seat. Abby.
The hot seat users have a question for Melba. And the question is, what should high school students be doing now to get into your program at Purdue?
Good question.
So I think that it's really important if you want to work in the engineering end to take, of course, all the math and the physics you can, but to engage, with the biology a little bit too. And for people who want to go into agronomy, of course, they need to understand biology and chemistry, but they also need to cross over and keep abreast of technology. So take that math as well. There's a place for all of you here at Purdue University.
That's great. And then we just had an email question come in for you, Jeff, from the experiment that we did today and the work that you're doing. What are the implications that can be drawn from your work? How do you use this information?
Right, so we're trying to use the work that we do to better understand the responses of plants and microbes and ecosystems in general to climate. And so we want to take those responses and turn them into equations of some sort, turn them into some actual quantified response that we can use to then improve how we model climate change. So our answers, our work goes towards models of ecosystems, improving models of ecosystems that are then part of larger models that include models of oceans and models of the atmosphere that are really altogether then a climate model, an Earth system model. And those Earth system models are used to project what future climate might look like, as well as what past climates might have been like.
Got it. And then we just had another email question come in for you, Mike. Is there a downside to using pesticides to treat the trees?
There's always a downside, because if you use a pesticide to kill an insect on a tree, you also have you're going to kill the other insects on the tree, so you can kill the native ones that could be having a beneficial effect. So when you use pesticides to control an invasive insect, you have to really balance the idea that you need to control this dangerous insect with the effect you're going to have on the native ones. It could be an important part of that ecosystem.
So you've got to weigh your pros and cons, basically.
Yeah, there's always a decision to be made.
Got it. And then let's go ahead and check back in with Abby in the hot seat. What's the hot question, Abby?
The hot seat users have a question for Mike, and it is, do you know anything about the progress of a GMO chestnut tree versus a standard crossbred tree?
I know a little bit about that, because the emphasis for so long has been on using the traditional way of back crossing and crossing between two individuals in the field, that's really been the main focus. And it's gotten so far along that's really kind of where the program has been moving largely. I don't think that the GMO, the genetic manipulation, has really kind of caught up to that point, just because the back crossing program has had decades and decades to work through, and they're kind of reaching a point where they think they might be reaching a final product.
Got it. And then this question came in from Pike High School in Indianapolis. This is for you, Jeff. Can plants cause global warming?
So plants sort of respond to global warming. Plants are part of the carbon cycle, like I talked about. If you cut down a whole lot of plants, since plants are 50% carbon, give or take, they decompose, and that carbon goes back up to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So plants are definitely really related to climate change quite tightly. But on their own, if we left them alone, they wouldn't really do anything to cause climate change. They would just be helping regulate the planet, and of course providing oxygen for us and providing all the other products that we use that are based on plants. So they respond to climate change.
Right.
They may actually slow it down. I mean, one of the big questions in our research is whether they help accelerate or slow down climate change when it's happening, but on their own they don't really do anything. They don't cause it at all.
Got it. And then this question just came in for you, Melba. Where do you learn about this technology and what's available? I think the student is asking, where can he or she learn about this technology and what's available to him or her?
Well, there's a lot in that word technology. So I think that people who are interested in cameras, people who are interested in aircraft, there's just a lot going on in the the science world now. I think that many of the trade magazines, there's a lot of, even on videos. So people who want to learn to fly, I've seen a lot of videos on that, and then people will buy a simple GoPro camera. They might pop it on a UAV and go fly it, and then they say, oh my gosh, I've got to analyze the data. Well, how do I learn to do that? And so there's a lot available if you're in middle school or high school that you can find online. But at the high school level, there's also a lot of clubs that are available. And then when you come to the university, I think the one thing that I would say is people need to really be interested in working with people who are not necessarily just in their domain. So when I recruit students, I ask them, do you like to be outside? Don't plan on just sitting at a computer. I say to the plant scientist, do you like to use computers? You need to plan to do so. So I think just sort of developing the fundamentals and then getting involved with clubs at the middle school and high school stage is a great thing to do. And these are available in amateur kind of clubs.
Very good stuff. Well, these were great questions, everyone. And for the questions that we were not able to get to today, we will be sending out an email with the most frequently asked questions from today's show for teachers to review with their students. And for future Zip Trips episodes, keep checking those emails and the Zip Trips website for updates. Thanks to all of our students who are watching today and being interactive with us, and to our scientists here in the studio with us today. For all of you, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.